So like everybody else in the Western world, we're all marooned at home. So we thought we'd take this opportunity to answer that age-old barball question. What are the best cars we've ever driven? So I'm delighted to be joined by Carlos Largo, Elana Share, and Mark Takahashi, who I believe has made some terrible choices. So we're going to kick off and we're going to each name our first of our three best of. So Carlos, do you want to go first?
My first favorite, I'm happy because it gives me another chance to talk about my own truck, a 1972 Chevrolet C10. It's bright red, loud, it doesn't move much, and it's not very fun to drive. I would actually say it's objectively a pretty poor vehicle, but I love driving it, and I do because it reminds me of why driving is fun. It's visceral, it's involving, even when you're only going 40 miles an hour, you feel like you're going 90, and it makes a lot of terrific noises, and it just looks cool.
And it scares the dog.
It scares the neighborhood.
You know, I always thought of it as orange. Is it red?
It's like a hybrid between the two. I forget what the Chevy's paint code is, but it's somewhere between the two, and I'm not even sure if it's a specific match to the OEM color. Some guy in Arizona who did a mild restoration on it painted this color and tried to match the OE color best he could. You know, whether he did it or not, I still think it looks cool.
It looks great, yeah. I've always liked it.
Alana, what's your first choice?
So when I was thinking about this list, I gave myself a last 5 years kind of rule. Like Carlos, I own many of my favorite cars and they're all classic cars. That's a commitment, and I understand that not everyone is ready for that old car commitment. And 2017 Dodge Viper ACR is my number one.
You're talking about commitment. That's a car that requires commitment.
Yeah, but it has fuel injection and air conditioning, so.
Oh, the luxury.
When you drive a Viper, you just feel like you personally did something impressive. And I just like that.
My first favorite car is the Porsche Carrera GT. It was the first supercar I drove. And it's the only car I've driven so far that revs that quickly. It doesn't rev, it barks. It's wah, wah, wah. It's just mind-boggling. The clutch engagement was super, super narrow, so you had to be on your game the whole time. You could not be complacent with this car. The brakes were so amazing. I was driving it at Auto Club Speedway out in Fontana, and on the straight, I braked so hard that the lid of my helmet flipped open. There were that many negative G's. It was gorgeous. If I win the Powerball, I'm buying one in silver with a red leather interior. That's it. Done.
So my first favorite car is another one that I've personally owned, the Caterham 7. Fabulous. And I raced one for 4 years in Europe. And when I moved to the US, that was like leave your family, leave your home, leave your racing. And the racing was arguably the toughest because I absolutely loved it. And it just was all about purity. It was a car which basically is a bunch of pipes with an engine, no ABS, no traction control, H-pattern gearbox, all about the purity of the experience. Only got 140 horsepower, but it only weighs 1,000 pounds. It's the lower powered ones that are actually better because then the balance of grip versus horsepower. And it was just such an amazing experience. And I did have a massive accident in one as well. So as long as you get hit by another Caterham, then you're generally okay.
It cancels out.
I was racing at Zolder in the Netherlands, and it was my first season in this championship, and I got T-boned at 70 miles an hour. And I've got a little bit of a clip of it here. And it was one of those where you get whacked, you see it happening, and then you've got like a split second to work out whether you're still in one piece or whether your pelvis is smashed. And I got a bit of whiplash and pretty bruised and battered, but I was okay.
My second favorite is quite different. It's the Ferrari LaFerrari. It's so important they named it the Ferrari. So if you were to say the make model, it would be Ferrari the Ferrari, which was endlessly amusing. But how could you not like this thing? I mean, 950 horsepower total, a V12 that revved to 9,200 RPM or so. It did the quarter mile in 9.7 seconds. I tested one. I got the luxury of driving this car twice. And the reason why it sticks so high on my list is because when I thought of my favorites, I thought about experiences that I remember the most vividly. And like, I can still remember how the air smelled when I was driving this car. It was imprinted that firmly in my mind. It was such an extraordinary machine and such an amazing experience to drive it. I've never driven anything like it. I don't know if I ever will again. And it stands to be one of the fastest cars, most powerful cars I've ever driven. And it was also a hybrid, which is also fun to point out.
My second favorite is sort of like the Viper in that it makes you feel like you're driving a spaceship, but the actual driving experience is very different, and that is the 2019 McLaren 720S. It's very sophisticated. It's got all kinds of useful technology. It was the easiest supercar to drive in normal traffic situations that I've ever been in. Rear pillars are clear so you can see when you're changing lanes. It has excellent cameras, so you can park in very tight, tiny spaces, and it just doesn't feel like a problem, which most of those cars are not. It's not easy. And then, of course, if you get to where there isn't a whole bunch of stuff around you, you can just do launch control launches till you barf from laughing. So, what else do you need? Maybe a price tag that isn't $300,000. That'd be good.
And also, you feel like I've got my Pride and Joy Senna picture behind me. You do feel like there's a certain lineage with McLaren as well.
Absolutely.
My second favorite car is the BMW M Coupe, the original ugly clown shoe. It was one of the most fun cars ever to drive. I could make this thing dance, slide it sideways, and have it stop at slide exactly where I wanted it. It was like it was hardwired right into my brain. And it was even more fun in the rain. I mean, just ridiculous amounts of oversteer that made me just love everything about that car. It wasn't the most attractive car. It wasn't all that convenient, though it was a hatchback, but I didn't care. It was fantastic. The funniest part about this car, though, my girlfriend kept crashing. It was actually her car. Her nickname was actually Crash. After she sold it, it ended up showing up at an Edmunds company picnic. One of our former employees had bought it after she sold it and showed up to it. And he was not at all amused by the stories I was telling about that car.
I can remember writing the Autocar magazine road test on the M Coupe when it was new, and I think it was 98 or 99. And not actually thinking that much. I love the idea that it was this kind of built as this secret Skunkworks project, but it had the old E30 rear end. It was really understeer, and I didn't really fit in it. I just remember not actually thinking it was that great. But anyway.
Understeer? I don't think I ever got that car to understeer.
Front end push.
Agree to disagree.
I'm going to go with a very sensible choice here. Current generation, well, only generation, Kia Telluride. I just think it's one of those cars, now and again, you've seen it very occasionally in my career, where a mainstream manufacturer just absolutely nails it. And I think the Telluride is so far ahead of everything else, and it's just, there's very little to fault about it. I know we've given it a bunch of awards and everything else, but a three-row SUV at that money, looking as good as it does, driving as well as it does, I just think it's a fabulous car. And the Stinger was supposed to be Kia's breakthrough car that took them into a different kind of sector of the market, but it's actually the Telluride that's the breakthrough. I think it's as good as so many luxury vehicles costing almost twice as much. And what's amazing about it is, I think everybody agrees, because you still can't buy one for the MSRP. They're still charging a premium. It's crazy.
It's wild what happens when you make a really good product.
My final choice for favourite car is truly evocative. The Ferrari 250 GT Berlinetta short wheelbase. Just beautiful. You know that whole thing about don't meet your heroes? I've driven lots of classic cars that disappointed. This just didn't. Launched in 1959, I think there's like 170 something actually made. Just sounded beautiful, looked glorious in an era where things were just beautiful. Everything wasn't about aerodynamics, and just driving it around in the UK, it kind of took you back to imagining, Brigitte Bardot and just that kind of incredibly evocative era. And I know that $10 million or something, but it was a really special experience. And, if I win the lottery, if I can buy one, 250 short wheelbase. Favorite Ferrari, favorite car.
Well done. I approve.
Thank you, Mark. Go on then, Mark. What's your final favorite?
Well, I don't mean to sound pretentious and snobby, but it is my brand. It's the 1941 BMW 328 Berlin to Rome Roadster. They only made 3. The one I drove was the last remaining, but the kicker is it was my very first foreign press trip. I got to drive it from Lake Como over the Alps into Switzerland and Liechtenstein. It was glorious. When we hit the switchbacks, I realized I can keep pushing it harder and harder. And when I finally realized I was sliding it through each one of those switchbacks, it was a religious experience. The sound, the smell, everything is still patterned in my brain. So it's definitely one of my automotive deathbed memories. When I'm checking out, that car is going to be the top of my brain right there on replay.
My third favorite is the Dodge Charger Hellcat. Not the red eye, not the wide body, just the plain old 707 first one. You were talking about good memories with cars, and this was pretty early in my career as far as being able to drive new cars. And I had a Charger Hellcat, 2 friends, which is all the friends I have, a set of slicks, and we mapped out 6 different drag strips. And we had 5 days on the road, and we basically hit a drag strip every day, swapped our wheels over, went drag racing, ran 11s, moved on to the next one. And it was just the most 2-lane blacktop moment of my entire hot rodding life.
I think this experiment is failing really miserably.
I love it.
I'm going to give it back to a mum.
My final best car is also my final worst car, and that's the 1975 AMC Gremlin. On the positive side of things, like I mentioned with the LaFerrari, I remember experiences, and the Gremlin was actually tied with the Morgan 3-wheeler for the most I've ever been stopped in traffic just to get talked to about the car. And it was actually tough for me to decide between the two, but I thought the AMC Gremlin was a little bit more charming because of how bad it looks. But when I drove this car, so many people pulled over to talk about the one that they had in their family, that their parents drove, or the one that they had when they were teenagers. And it was really charming from that perspective. On the other hand, it was still a pretty bad car. It was a successful car. I think AMC sold a ton of them, but just because something's popular doesn't really make it good. It was, the story goes, it was designed on the back of an in-flight vomit bag, and I think that really tells you everything you need to know. It may be coming back now as sort of like getting some charm for how dorky it looks, but I still can't stomach it.
And why would you call a car a gremlin? Why would you call it after a problem?
Right?
I know that everybody here has their own favourites and worst cars, so please join the debate in the comments down here somewhere. Look after yourself, everybody.
Bye!